Welcome to Storytimer. Cheryl Marie Lacey. Cheryl Marie Lacey was a New Year's baby born on the very first day of January in 1959 to Dell and Dorothy Lacey. They lived in Oak Forest, Illinois. It's a suburb on the south side of Chicago. Cheryl had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. She graduated from Oak Forest High School. Cheryl worked as a nurse's aide in 1978. She lived in Harvey, Illinois, with a couple of roommates at 15010 Washtenaw Avenue. Harvey is not too far from Oak Forest, Illinois, so she wasn't far away from her family when she needed them. 19-year-old Cheryl was just venturing out into the world. Cheryl and some of her friends went out on June 11, 1978, to a disco, Eddie Mac's Bar at 3915 West 147th Street in Midlothian. They were young, and disco was incredibly popular. Everyone wanted to dance to that music. One article said that the bar was Lulu's Tap at 3917 West 147th Street. Another article said it was Eddie Mac's next door at 3915 West 147th. Larry and Edward Batcher were brothers. Larry was 20, and Edward was 21. Philip Sturgill was a 27-year-old friend of theirs. The 3 men also went to that bar on June 11th in Midlothian. They were from LaPorte, Indiana. That's about an hour's drive to the east. The 3 men met 19-year-old Cheryl in the bar that night. She had not known them before. She left with them, but nothing looked suspicious or dangerous to onlookers as they left. But to me, a 19-year-old girl leaving with 3 men doesn't look at all safe or normal. The witness quoted in the paper who said that Cheryl left willingly was a man. No women witnesses were quoted in the paper. The next day, Larry Batcher went to the police in Westmont, Illinois. That's several miles north and west of Midlothian and Harvey, Illinois. Larry and Edward Batcher's father, Edward Batcher Sr., was a policeman in Harvey, Illinois for decades at that time. Larry said that his brother Edward and his friend Philip Sturgill had murdered Cheryl Lacey with a roofing hammer the night before and dumped her near LaPorte, Indiana. The Indiana State Police were notified, and they found Cheryl's body exactly where Larry Batcher said it would be. They arrested Edward Batcher at home, and he was held in LaPorte on a public intoxication charge pending the investigation. On June 12, 1978, Cheryl Lacey was recovered from a wooded area on the site of Wilhelm Road north of LaPorte, Indiana. Her body was located about a mile and a half south of County Road 1000 North. It's still a very rural road today with fields, barns, and farmhouses. It looks more like a postcard than anything else. Cheryl was found still wearing a torn shirt, but nothing else. She had been raped and beaten and had suffered massive head trauma. Her body had also suffered scratches and abrasions from being dragged into the woods. Cheryl's roommates reported her missing on June 13th. One newspaper article slightly disparaged them for waiting, but the old rule used to be that a report could not be filed for 24 hours. I would bet that this was the case here. Her roommates were not interviewed by the newspaper. Meanwhile, the police in Westmont had let Larry Batcher go and made him promise to turn himself in to authorities in Indiana. He failed to do so. By June 20th, he was still on the run, and his attorneys had promised that he would turn himself in within 24 hours. Philip Sturgill was also still being sought at that time. Edward Batcher was in custody. At the time of the murder, both Larry and Edward had criminal records. Edward Batcher Jr. and his father, Edward Batcher Sr., were involved in a domestic disturbance on July 28, 1976. Edward Batcher Sr. was found bleeding and unconscious, and Edward Jr., who was 19 at that time, was found in another room in their home in LaPorte. The father was taken to the hospital. The article reads, "Police subdued the son after he became belligerent with the officers." Edward Batcher Jr. was treated at the mental health facility in Illinois. In January of 1977, Larry and his twin brother Gary, along with Edward, were arrested in LaPorte for an armed robbery they had committed in Harvey, Illinois. It's interesting that they would commit this robbery in the town where their father was a policeman. and that they chose to do this only 6 months after Edward Jr. put Edward Sr., the policeman, in the hospital. The article about this arrest states that the tactical unit was sent to arrest them because all three had a history of violent behavior. I could not find a yearbook in which Larry and his twin brother Gary and Edward are attending school together. Sometimes yearbooks are just not available online, but I am also wondering if the three boys were separated at times during their adolescence and may be sent to live with relatives or some other living arrangement. It's very difficult to find photos of them. By the 22nd of June in 1978, Philip Sturgill was in custody, but Larry Batcher was still on the loose. Larry Batcher finally turned himself in 11 days after his initial report to the Westmont police on June 23, 1978. Now you're probably thinking that they were all convicted of murder because they took a girl from a bar and raped and murdered her. Prepare to be disappointed. If you read a great deal of true crime from the 1970s, you won't be surprised by what comes next. Edward Batcher was convicted not of rape or of murder, but of voluntary manslaughter after plea bargaining in July of 1979. He died a free man in 1988 in Belvedere, Tennessee, where his mother lived. His cause of death was not something I could find in my research. Philip Sturgill was sentenced to 3 years starting in October 1979 for assisting in the beating death of Cheryl Lacey. In 1980, he was back in court pleading to be released. His ex-wife testified that his incarceration was a financial hardship. Philip said that he was sober now and that he had learned his lesson. Philip died in 2016 in Newburgh, Indiana. His obituary said he liked flea markets and Jesus and his family. It also said that he and his second wife had 33 wonderful years together. Larry Batcher would be in and out of jail numerous times in the next decades. In 1981, arrested in Portage for harassment. 1982, receiving stolen property and harassment. He was given 18 months probation. 1986, resisting police, criminal mischief, and criminal trespassing. 1988, public intoxication and trespassing. It seems like Gary, Larry, and Edward Batcher, probably all three, struggled with mental health and addiction issues. Larry was still alive when Edward died in November of 1988. I haven't found any news of the passing of Larry or Gary Batcher. One thing that occurs to me again and again is how much suffering could have been avoided in the 1970s and 1980s if mental health care could have been more accessible and less stigmatized. It seems like these young men could have gotten treatment when they were adolescents. Perhaps more pain and tragedy could have been avoided. Cheryl Marie Lacey was only 19. She was just starting her life as a nurse's aide when it was stolen from her. She was callously raped and her head was beaten in with a hammer. She was dumped like garbage. If not for the guilty conscience of Larry Batcher, she might still be in those woods off Wilhelm Road, northwest of LaPorte. Cheryl Marie Lacey deserved a long life. She didn't get to pursue her career. She didn't get to fall in love. She didn't get to be a bride or a mother or a grandmother. She didn't get to travel and see the world. She was only 19. Cheryl would have been 65 in 2024. She would have been retiring. She might have been enjoying her grandchildren or thinking about what fun things she might do in retirement. She deserved to be here. Rest in peace, Cheryl Marie Lacey.